This is a story of a Fortnite duo so good, the competitive community thought they were cheating. Malibuca began playing Fortnite in Chapter 1, Season 3, and like many people, he was just playing for fun with no idea that over the next 5 years he'd earn over $900,000 in tournament prizing. His first earnings, like many players, came from the World Cup and the 2019 Winter Royale, and at this time he knew absolutely nothing about competing. Back then he was playing on a potato PC, but more than one person saw the potential in him.
At the start, I somehow won the money from World Cup and Frosty Frenzy, but this was a free cash or something. I was just playing placement like a bot, and then my brother saw that I was just winning something, and he bought me a decent PC with 120 Hz. And I also got lucky with friends. I was a friend with a pro player. I don't know if you remember Wings.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, at the start of Chapter 2, I was friends with him and others, so I kind of played with them ranked and creative, and I was catching up from them. So I think they did a big role in my career.
Many of the best pro players in the world have very similar stories where at least at one point in their career they surround themselves with players much better than them and have a massive spike in their performance. There's a saying in the strength sports world, if you're the strongest person in your gym, switch gyms. And this analogy really applies in any game or anything in your life that you want to get good at. With a new PC and a friend group of talented players, it wouldn't be long until Malibuca made his first FNCS Grand Finals in Chapter 2 Season 5. He was playing with Shizunami and Mayhem, and Malibuca was by far the least experienced player in the team.
And then we were just friends, we just fight it, let's play together, and I'm yeah. I have no choice, I have no one.
They went on to place 19th in their first grand finals together, not a bad finish. However, at this time during the middle of Chapter 2, a lot of OG players were struggling with motivation to play the game. Mayhem was really not enjoying the game at this time, which made him play less tournaments. So that meant for one random NA trio cash cup, Shizo and Malibuca were looking for one more player.
And Shizo just found Merstach. He said I know this guy. I think he was 1k or 2k earned back then. Not much more than me. I think I was 5k earned. And Shizo was 20k, so he was much higher. And we just played NA. We got prizes, but in the last place, but we were still happy. And we just saw some spark in Merstach. It was NA. He was just playing on it, full box. But he sounded so he wanted to play much more than Mayhem.
But they would make a bold decision in their first season, and that was to contest Mr. Savage, Andretta, and Refsgaard at Steamy Stacks. This trio had just come off of a second place finish in Season 6, so were definitely the favourites to win this off spawn, but oddly both teams decided to split the drop spot and not fight in most of the games. This really didn't work out well for Malibuca Merstach and Shizo, as they had almost no loot in every game and minimal storm surge. They ended up in 28th out of 33 teams, and understood that if they were contested again, they'd have to fight the team contesting them in the future to get any loot. But the following season, Mr. Savage and Andretta would swap out Refsgaard for Benji Fishy, now meaning that the trio had two of the biggest names in the scene in one team. Naturally, the fans of both audiences would think that the only reason Malibuca Merstach and Shizo were contesting them was to clout farm, but this couldn't be much further from the truth.
I mean, the good thing is that we honestly had no idea who they were, because we were kind of watching only CIS guys and stuff. Before Grants, we were just, oh my god, they have million followers, what the fuck.
Contesting drop spawns is just a part of Fortnite, and given both teams were now fighting every single game off spawn, this would lead Malibuca, Merstach, and Shizo to gain a ton of hate. Their reputation would only get worse, as many people in the community suspected that the trio was in some way cheating. Many different pros were tweeting out very suspect clips from all three members of the team, but predominantly from Shizo. This didn't mean that Malibuca and Merstach didn't get their fair share of suspect aim clips tweeted out on the timeline. The thing is though, this hatred didn't really last long, as this season Malibuca's team would dominate them on the leaderboards. Both trios went back and forth with each other, winning roughly the same amount of fights off spawn in Steamy Stacks, but it was what happened after these off spawns was where the difference was made. The games where Malibuca, Merstach, and Shizo won off spawn, they converted on, with 3 triple-digit elim games and a ton of top 10s, and overall finishing 7th out of 33 teams. At the time, this was one of the highest placements from a contested teams in FNCS finals ever. Mr. Savage, Benji, and Andretta, however, weren't able to do the same in their off-spawn wins and ended in 23rd place. With Malibuca Merstach and Shizo showing their potential, the response from the Mr. Savage and Benjifishy fans turned to being kind of split. 50% of them spammed them with hate messages for beating their favorite team, whereas the other 50% would praise them for being so good. Unfortunately, their off-spawn troubles wouldn't end there. Coming into 2022, Fortnite switched their main competitive mode to duos instead of trios, so Malibuca and Merstach decided to stick together as Shizo wanted to play with other players. Coming into FNCS Grand Finals in the first season, they immediately solidified themselves as a top contender duo. They were the only team to qualify to all 7 Duo Cash Cup finals and had an average placement of 10.3, incredibly impressive. Unfortunately, in FNCS finals, yet again they were contested by Gabix and Schmecky. Despite winning the majority of these off-spawn, this meant that third parties often rolled in from the surrounding POIs, resulting in them wasting a ton of their games. They placed a respectable 15th place out of 50 teams, but the following season they would yet again be contested, this time by Pink and Anas at the top of Covert Cavern. All season long they would go back and forward, with scores being relatively even, but just like at Steamy Stacks 2 seasons prior, they would dominate every game they got off spawn. In the first qualifier, they won 3 games off of the spawn and lost the other 3, so 50-50. However, in the 3 games they managed to beat Pink and Anas, they also managed to win that game. They placed first in this qualifier by only playing half of the games. This was so impressive, even Pink, who they were fighting off spawn, tweeted out his respects. Come to the finals, their dominance would continue, finishing with their best placement ever of 4th. This also could have easily been higher, a 3rd, 2nd, or maybe even a 1st, had they not lost that last game off spawn to Pink and Anas. What made this even more impressive were the conditions in which Malibuca played this season. At the start of this year, the Russia-Ukraine conflict would begin, and given the US would put sanctions onto Russia, this meant that any Russian residents were unable to participate in Fortnite events.
I mean, I just moved to Serbia, but I don't know, just no one moved. My brother said, fuck, let's go. So huge shout out to my brother.
This wasn't an issue for Merstach as he lives in Latvia. However, even a few seasons later, Russian players Swizzy and Putrik would be disqualified after winning FNCS from Russia since they had not moved out of the country, losing out on $100,000 each. Thanks to his brother's smart decisions, Malibuca was able to play the next season where they ended up placing 2nd, which resulted in him being the only Russian player eligible to go to the first Fortnite LAN since 2019, which was the FNCS Invitational, held at the end of 2022. The duo had placed extremely well in that year, placing 15th, 4th, and then 2nd, so they would have been favourites to win. However, they chose to land at Condo Canyon, contesting Tayson and Chapix and Aqua and Reason, so their loot was pretty shambles every game and they really struggled. They did manage a big 13 elim win in the final game, pushing them up to a 15th place finish, but this was far from the performance that they were capable of.
They added snipers in that season, and we played mid-map, God Split, we liked it so much, but we just tried it in Noble, and we just couldn't take Surge, because you had Oak, and you had to zoom and just stay AFK for 10 seconds to tag any Surge, and we were always getting headshot sniped, so we decided we can't play mid-map, we need to go edge and fight people or something. So we thought fuck, maybe we just go Conda, we die one game, we win one game and stuff like that. But I think week before the Invitational, they removed snipers and everyone just started to get Surge with the rifles again. We even had below in the most of the games, even after fighting, because trading Surge was big back then. So yeah, if we stayed mid-map, we probably would have got top 5 or something.
At this point, Malibuca and Merstach had been playing together for over 3 years, so they decided that sticking together for one more year would just be too long, and that it was time for a break and that they played with other people. This break would start off in the most interesting way humanly possible. In Major 1 of Chapter 4, Malibuca started playing with Thomas HD, and Merstach moved to playing with Tayson. Coming into the final game, both teams found themselves at the top of the leaderboard with only 3 points between them. For the first season ever, Malibuca and Merstach were unconned at their drop spots, just not when they were playing together. From their mid-map drop, Malibuca and Thomas were easily able to rack up early surge damage. Over in Slappy Shores, Merstach and Tayson were also able to get easy surge by trading with the team to their south. However, in this final game, from here, both teams would just play too safe and not take any risks as they were trying to rack up as many points as possible, which resulted in them both falling beneath the storm surge thresholds at the same time. Thomas hits a crazy pump to get them out, but accidentally left clicks the shockwave hammer as he has no charges left, causing him to die. Whilst Malibuca solo clutches, Merstach is dropped down by a shockwave hammer and also dies, leaving it down to Tayson versus Malibuca. Both players had incredible solo clutches that lasted over 3 minutes, but Malibuca just drained his materials faster than Tayson, meaning he went down first. There was only a 1-point difference between the two teams. Tayson and Merstach came out on top, becoming FNCS champions, which was Merstach's first time having the title. Had Malibuca survived 16 seconds longer in this solo clutch, the results would have flipped.
I mean, I was fully sad, obviously, the first time, but I was still thinking, like, we got second, we qualified for LAN already. I was just thinking about future FNCSs, like, we will have, like, spot to the LAN already, so probably we will be on con, right? And we were not on con. I don't know why, but okay. So I was sad, but, like, after a few hours, I realized, like, it's all good. I mean, it was mainly because, like, it was first season, so I was thinking we still have 2 seasons to win, like, to get that title. If it was, like, the last season, obviously I would be, like, more sad. I didn't even have a lot of, like, expectation for it. Like, first time playing with on English language, first time playing with Thomas, so top 2 was good for me, even by 1 point.
2023 was by far the best year for both Malibuca and Merstach. He had insane FNCS placements, and Malibuca won the Gamers 8 LAN with Epic Whale, removing any cheating accusations that were still held against him, and popped off in the solo cash cups, winning 5 in a row, which is great for his personal brand. And of course, they had both qualified to the FNCS Global Championship, the biggest event of the year. The two players had truly established themselves as top players in the world, and any hatred from the Mr. Savage and Ben Chiefisy fans was long forgotten about. Of course, at the FNCS Global Championships, the biggest event of 2023, Malibuca and Thomas HD's assumption of having an uncontested drop spot was far from true, as North America's Canadian Agers also chose to land at the racetrack. Now, racetrack was an incredible drop spot, however, it is a 50-50 spot, so having 2 of the best teams in the world landing here just leads to a lot of randomness. Malibuca and Thomas HD would finish in 38th place, really only playing out 2 of their games. Merstach and Tayson would similarly struggle just with the insane lag that this tournament had, and would end in 15th.
It just seems like much better for me to play with Merstach. Like, Thomas is an amazing player, but it's just better to play with someone Russian speaking. For Thomas, I think as well, we were kind of like, I don't know, after playing for a year, he wants to play with someone maybe who has better English comps, like Queasy. And also, Merstach maybe was tired of Tayson screaming at him.
Coming into the first FNCS Major of 2024, they kicked off the first qualifier by returning to their signature playstyle. Dying a lot off spawn, but having insane success in the games they don't. They dropped 2 10 elim wins and a 15 elim second, ending 7th on the leaderboards. Since they'd placed so high in the first qualifier, and, well, because the qualification system was kinda poo, this meant that they had already made it to the semi-finals, so in qualifier 2, they just trolled and skybased. Coming into the semi-finals, all they would need to do in order to qualify to the grand finals was win 1 single game, which, based on their performance in qualifier 1, when they actually tried, this should just be a piece of cake. Malibuca and Merstach's drop spot this season is fencing fields, and whilst fighting a contesting team, Merstach makes a mistake and is eliminated. Now, Malibuca could play out this game as a solo if it was a regular tournament, as he'd at least be able to gain a couple points out of this match. But since they have to win the game to qualify to finals, it's absolutely essential that he reboots Merstach. He first attempts this in the drop spot, but because it's somewhere close to the center of the zone, this means that there's a lot of teams around him, so he's unable to as he's pushed by Ricky and Dre. Thankfully, he's smart, and rather than trying to fight the 1v2, he just disengages with his grapple blade, and then he spends the next 13 minutes harvesting materials, taking shots at nearby teams for storm surge damage, and then using those materials to run away from full pro duos, all whilst hunting for an opportunity to reboot. Since he was able to stay alive for long enough for the storm to close in, this allows him to run far out of the safe circle and finally find a safe place to reboot Merstach that isn't surrounded by a ton of other teams. Or so they think. They get a usable loadout, however there's a team holding them at the edge of zone, and Merstach goes down for a second time. Malibuca is able to clutch up the 1v2, but now he has a max distance rotation, and he again has to find a place to reboot Merstach. He somehow makes this rotation all by himself, and intentionally pushes into the dead side of the zone to reboot. Malibuca times the reboot with the 7th zone closing, as most of the other teams will be rotating at this time, and thankfully the other players are too busy focusing on where they need to go to look at Merstach. So for the second time this game, Merstach is rebooted. They're left with almost no loot, but this is where their hyper-aggressive playstyle is at its best, as they jump in box after box after box until until they've picked up another 3 eliminations and now have max materials. With a winning loadout secured, they take height, and in the final moving zone, Malibuca drops down to frag out. But best of all, the reboots have actually benefited them. Since Merstach has been dead the entire game, he's taken minimal storm damage. So with 0 elims and 5 minutes playtime, Merstach wins the heal off on height because he doesn't get storm sickness, and this qualifies them to the FNCS Grand Finals. Now you may think that Malibuca heavily carried this duo based off this one game alone, maybe you could make an argument just on that one semi-finals match. However, come to the finals, each player would absolutely carry their own weight. Malibuca is the IGL, the decision maker and the leader, whereas Merstach frags out, and frag out he did. Out of the duo's 52 eliminations, he had 36 and he had almost double Malibuca's damage. But in order to understand how they do this so well, you first need to understand their general game plan. They chose to land at fencing fields so they could take advantage of Nisha's mythic striker assault rifle and her medallion. However, the first big problem they'd encounter here was the same one that's plagued their previous FNCSs, being contested. They weren't the only ones looking for this loot, as Diox and Cade and Lazen and Lox were also landing here. But being contested for so many seasons has given Malibuca and Merstach a great mentality towards these off-spawn fights.
When we're conned, we feel just like we have no pressure. If we do bad, then it's okay. We were conned, we couldn't do our best anyway. But we just play with this mentality when we have nothing to lose. We don't have any pressure. And I don't know, I guess that's how we just play good when we're conned.
And play good while conned they did. They immediately looked to capitalize on teams contesting them around them by ramping up onto height and getting the initial damage first. Once we were certain the other teams weren't pushing them, they lured the boss Nisha all the way to the back of the POI to give the contesting teams the least chanced third party. Game 1's off to a good start as they already have the strongest weapon this season and the medallion to recharge their shields infinitely. However, they do have minimal materials, so while Merstach harvests the fast farming brick to the south and loots the main building, Malibuca pushes back onto the roof of main to scout if Diox or Lazen's duos were pushing. Because the contesting teams have taken the majority of the other loot, Malibuca and Merstach need to take the vault. However, they're unsure if one of the contesting teams will be hiding down here. Whilst approaching it, they ensure that they carefully block every possible corner and angle on approach so they don't just get snuck up on. This way, they're able to claim the vault, and they break the floors in here to quickly open every chest and ammo box to be as efficient as possible. Despite taking height multiple times in the drop spot and scouting, they haven't actually connected any shots this game, meaning they've dealt 0 storm surge damage. Now this is where the medallion comes into play. They push to the south to get some storm surge damage onto Kami and Seti and Aqua and Noah Rayleigh. They openly bloom battle the teams, just 50-50ing them to trade damage, and this might seem like a risky play, but they know the medallion will recharge their shields up to 50, so they're open to take the risk. But not only that, because Fencing Fields has a ton of flowberry spawns surrounding the drop, this means that they can use these to recharge their shields all the way up to max. The combination of the medallion and the flowberries means that they've essentially wasted 0 of the heals they looted off spawn. However, they've gained a ton of storm surge damage. But they lack one important component here, which is metal. The drop spot has barely any, and it's almost impossible to farm anywhere else as other teams take it quickly, so they're forced to take their combat cache every single game, as this will give them 400. Now in this 12-game tournament, they claimed a combat cache in every single game outside of the last 2. In this game, they waited until the cache spawned in the 3rd zone, and Merstach pops a flowberry and instantly crashpad rotates onto it, ensuring he's the first team there. Now the main reason they went for the caches was the metal, but in this game they were lucky enough to have it paired with Pablo and Bevies, who were completely stacked and did not need the loot, so they got it completely for free because there was no need for Bevies and Pablos to fight over loot that they already had. RIP to this strategy since caches have been removed, but the bunkers still offer around 300 metal. However, this just takes a lot of time to harvest. From here, Malibuca and Merstach nearly always commit to a fight before the moving zones. In a meta where it's really difficult to get storm surge damage with rifles, this is nearly always the most reliable way to stay above the threshold as long as you can win every single fight, which of course is easier said than done. However, if you choose a difficult target, in Game 1's case, Kiro and Kiduo, who are below the storm surge threshold and need damage, then the fight can drag out for a long time, which doesn't only drain your materials and heals, but negatively impacts your positioning and rotations, which in this game in particular leads Merstach to land in the same box as Diox and Cade and die, with Malibuca falling shortly after him. So the game plan is pretty simple: land at Frenzy Fields to get the Mythic and the Medallion, trade early Surge, get cash for metal, fight a team for Surge, and then play endgame. With this in mind, it's much easier to understand how they improvised and altered this game plan in the next 11 games to lead them to an FNCS championship. In fact, in Game 2, the script is completely flipped on them as Andalix and Sato Flowberry crashpad onto Merstach's head, almost wiping him out. Skillfully, he's able to escape and is able to replenish his health with the medallion and other heals, but given this is an opportunity to get their surge damage early, they immediately retaliate with their own aggression. Most players fight slowly and carefully and would drag this fight on for minutes, but Malibuca and Merstach play a high-risk, high-reward playstyle, so they pinch either side of the box and just spray their way inside, wiping Andalix out in seconds. But this particular playstyle caused Merstach a bunch of issues in the past.
Yeah, it's like Tyson would be just mad because like, why would you do it? Like, we just lose one game, yeah, it works out in 10 other, but like, I'm thinking, like, if he does it in 10 times, then like 9 games we get god loot, and then 1 game we just die. Fuck it, I'll just play 9 games with god loot.
However, this would be one of the 10 games where this playstyle didn't work out. With some more surge secured while going for their combat cache, they played the dead side of the zone for the rest of the game. Since they didn't need much more damage, staying in this part of the zone with the least amount of players makes a ton of sense. However, they hear a team next to them being tagged by active storm surge and make the incredibly aggressive play to crash pad into their box. However, Malibuca gets sniped after missing and Merstach loses the 1v2, but thanks for server lag we can't really see that. And their third game wouldn't be much better. Their combat cache was uncontested again, which you'd think would benefit them as they get the free loot. However, this meant that 11 minutes into the game they had dealt 0 damage. Since this cache was relatively central on the map, many players will be rotating around this area, so Merstach boxes on a hill and is not only able to hit one headshot snipe, but hits another body to get both elims. But looting these bodies leaves them stuck behind on rotation, which snowballs into them getting stuck at the edge of zone and getting lobby focused. Yet again, they die before the moving zones, and at this point they aren't even in the top half of the leaderboard. But they would quickly learn from their mistakes going into game 4, where Merstach would deal 1,415 damage in comparison to Malibuca's 662. Since many players rotate through fencing fields for the berries and additional loot, Merstach bases there to give them access to many players rotating through. However, it's a large POI with a lot of space, so in this game he decides to pick up an Enforcer AR to give him extra damage at range on these players rotating. Despite both of these weapons no longer being in the current meta, this can still be easily done with a DMR or any other long-range weapon. A lot of the most successful teams over the last few years have put a large focus into playing height and winning games in the endgame, but this just doesn't match the aggressive playstyle of Malibuca and Merstach. Instead, they thrive on a very different layer. In most endgames, there's a cluster of players on the bottom 3 or 4 layers, so by positioning yourself 1 or 2 layers above that in the mid-ground, you create a layer gap underneath you. This gives Merstach a huge amount of angles to look for players rotating beneath and around him, and all Malibuca needs to do is focus on getting to the front side in this layer to set up Merstach to go for these angles. As stated in my best thumbnail of all time, Merstach literally walks backwards through the tarps on these good layers, hunting for his opponents to spray. Since it's often too risky to drop down from the loot that Merstach gets from these elims, they'll run low on mats. But Malibuca and Merstach are masters of clearing players off of their old layer using pre-edits. Malibuca sprays and replaces, whilst Merstach's only job is to spray in with the mythic AR and run in their face. They do this with such speed and consistency, it's almost impossible for players on their layer to react. Unfortunately, in this game, Merstach's floor gets double sprayed and he falls down into a box and is wiped out, but Malibuca is able to clutch up a second place finish by playing medkits in the storm. But they'd continue that impressive momentum into game 5. They gain some early storm surge by baiting a cache box from a bush and make it into endgame with good loot yet again. However, they are slightly late to rotate and as such start to get sprayed by a team near them. Now the longer they sit here and just hold their walls while being sprayed, the higher the likelihood of more players in the lobby joining in and also shooting at them, which can easily snowball into you getting server sprayed and just dying. So to prevent this, Merstach's first instinct is to move 1 tile to the right and open an edit in the box that is not getting sprayed and counter their aggression by spraying back. This damage causes them to stop shooting and close their edit, preventing Malibuca and Merstach from getting lobby focused before it can even happen. In this game, Merstach drops 8 elims in the endgame due to his constant awareness of the players around him like the previous game. However, when they're going for height, he's shot in the back by a player in storm and is not. Malibuca, left as a solo, attempts to clutch the 1v2, however he kind of just fires himself around with the crash pads and the grapple blade until he dies. But with 2 second place finishes in a row, they've now flown up the leaderboards into 2nd place. But unfortunately, that momentum would die quickly coming into the 6th game. So far, the teams contesting him in Frenzy Fields have not interacted with them, but Malibuca, using the gold from the vault, pushes towards the vending machine to buy medkits to win the game with. However, he's just baiting Diox to open his edit as Merstach is waiting at an alternate angle with his sniper. Later in the game, he hits yet another crazy snipe onto Phaser, but their own aggressive run-in box playstyle is used against them by Vidil and Reason, ending their day 1. They dropped down to third on the leaderboards, with the team that would become their main competitors only 2 points behind them, Queasy and Thomas HD, Malibuca's ex-teammate. And unfortunately for them, this duo would heat up in day 2. It was a pretty decent start for Malibuca and Merstach as well, with 2 games into the top 10. However, they failed to convert these into top 5s, which is where all of the big placement points were. However, in both of these matches, they tanked Storm to pop medkits once they'd run out of materials, which gained them valuable placement points and would be a trend going forward. However, game 9 would shake up the leaderboards in a big way. Malibuca and Merstach, for the 3rd time in a row, had a respectable game where they were able to get into the top 10. However, Thomas HD and Queasy would pop off, winning with 7 eliminations. But not only that, they would frag out with an 8 elim 4th in game number 10, whilst Malibuca and Merstach struggled. So with only 2 games remaining, Queasy and Thomas HD topped the leaderboards, with Malibuca and Merstach only being 26 points behind both of them. Now, it was still mathematically possible for Reason and Vidil in 3rd place to win if they played out of their minds in the final 2 games. However, disaster would strike as Vidil would randomly fail to load into the game for absolutely no reason, leaving Reason as a solo and removing really any chance they had at winning. This meant that it all came down to Malibuca and Merstach versus Thomas HD and Queasy. All weekend, Queasy and Thomas HD had been fighting Noms and Cringe off spawn at Lavish Lair. However, in game 11, they would leave the drop spot, guaranteeing their success off spawn. To make things worse, Merstach is obliterated on a max distance 5th zone rotate, leaving Malibuca as a solo. Now, he manages to win a fight in Storm, which grants him some medkits and allows him to rift into the safe circle. Meanwhile, in the box right next to him, Thomas HD and Queasy are struggling with Surge. Not having the 200 plus damage from fighting off spawn was hindering them, and they spent far too long looking for tags and get stuck behind in their rotation. They chose to stagger to let their grapple blades charge, since the zones pull up a massive hill and they were needed, but this gets them stuck in amongst their last teams to rotate, meaning Thomas has to fight someone in Storm and then medkit, eventually dying, and Queasy is also left as a solo, rotating up a hill, and is also lobby focused. But on this exact same rotation, Malibuca as a solo decides to rotate 6 seconds earlier than Thomas HD and Queasy, and because of this, he doesn't get stuck in amongst the congestion of players trying to rotate up the hill. However, once he gets into zone, he's sprayed down just to 4 HP, but makes a crucial play. He runs back into the Storm to play his medkit, the same strategy he's used in games 7, 8, and 9. At the time he decided to do this, Malibuca and Merstach were on 592 points, and had he not ran into Storm, he would have likely have just died. But this play was an 18-point medkit, as it kept him alive as a solo all the way up to 610 points. Only one team could be crowned FNCS champions and win $170,000. But with a single game remaining and only 2 points difference between the 2 teams, you'd think nerves would be high.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about Merstach. He was just saying like, let's go, we're gonna win this. And I was just saying like, I mean, if we don't win this, it's all good. Thomas will win, but like, let's try our best. Let's not be nervous. You already have the FNCS win, and I don't care. So yeah, just need to kind of just forget about everything and just play it like your first game.
Most nervous teams would play incredibly passive, and coming into the final game with the championship on the line, Malibuca and Merstach's gameplay spoke for itself. They started the game by Flowbirdy crash padding right onto Noah Rayleigh's head, and after racking up the damage, they pushed to Loot Island to harvest the additional materials they needed. However, they weren't the only team going for it. With the free 4 points from this elim, this would have put them ahead of Queasy and Thomas HD in the leaderboard. However, Queasy also got a free elim onto Teeny off spawn, keeping them 2 points ahead. Despite this, Queasy and Thomas were playing safe and were struggling with Storm Surge damage, but Thomas snaps a crucial snipe onto Phaser, keeping them alive. They force the fight, which drains their mats, but gives them some surge damage that they desperately needed. But with minimal shield remaining, Queasy is picked off on rotation. Thomas, left as a solo, does his best to survive, but is eventually lobbied by Malibuca and Merstach. But Malibuca is immediately jumped in on as a solo, leaving Merstach alone. Their most successful games all revolve around staying on higher mid-ground layers and looking back towards low ground, and ironically their last game ends by Merstach dropping down to low and getting lobby focused. In the final 2 seconds of Merstach's life, his points flipped from 646 to 649. Had he died 2 seconds earlier, Queasy and Thomas HD would have won the FNCS championship. Many people have pointed out that in one of the games, Cringe drops and dies to fall damage, meaning that Queasy and Thomas HD did not get these 4 points, and had he not done this, they also could have won the FNCS championship. But there was also a moment in game number 11 where, whilst deep into the back of the Storm, had Thomas HD shot at Malibuca, He would have easily killed him here, gaining enough points to win the championship. And because of all these reasons, Malibuca doesn't believe that him and Merstach really earned this win.
It's also like the fact that I don't really feel like it's a win. Like it actually was RNG because like 1 point, like 1 point is nothing. It's 12 games. It's so many kills. Just one placement in this game. We get one placement worse. They get one placement better in one of the 12 games. They win. Like it's, I don't know. It's basically we just split second place. If we won last game and we're like 100 points ahead, then I would be happy. But still, I don't see this as a like win. Like if I win FNCS with like no snipers, with another team having a decent spot, then and like not 1 point lead, then like that's gonna be a real win.